Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another live stream. Thank you so much for everyone joining me for this late live stream. Apologies for the delay in the live stream tonight, but we'd rather have a live stream than not. I wanted to speak to you about some interesting developments in this live stream. Obviously, let's give ourselves just a couple of minutes to make sure everything's up and running. Before we get into the live, as usual, there's a slight delay when it comes to the live stream itself, unless you're obviously watching this recorded, in which case you will view the live stream from the beginning. And it looks like everything is fine now. Again, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining me for another live stream. I posted one video earlier on today. And in this live stream, I wanted to talk to you about, obviously, the very sensitive and dangerous situation when it comes to Lebanon and the increasing threats and the reckless attacks from Israel, which led to the issue of warnings from the UN, something that was published on the Times of Israel, from an apocalyptic war between Israel and Hezbollah. Israel and Hezbollah so far have had certain attacks between them that had an underlying understanding. You attack this far, I retaliate this far. Israel is the side that's been pushing the boundaries. And obviously everyone must remember is that Israel is the main cause of this problem. By committing this genocide in Gaza, Hezbollah told them, stop the war in Gaza, we will stop attacking. And although Hezbollah said that to Israel, Israel said, no, we're treating Lebanon differently. So even if we stop the war in Gaza, going to Lebanon, now we have reports that they're finalizing the Rafah campaign, the Rafah genocide, and taking everyone to Lebanon to prepare for an all-out war with Lebanon. One of the most dangerous attacks that Israel carried out in the past 24 hours is an attack on an electric grid to do with electricity in a town called Al-Taibi. So they're sending signals to Hezbollah that we are expanding our targets. Now you're targeting electric powers in Lebanon. Obviously, they've had this report from the Daily Telegraph saying that Hezbollah have weapons in Al-Hariri airport to justify an upcoming attack from Israel, which we obviously criticized at the time. Unsubstantiated, hostile, and very malicious in intent, which is very typical from a newspaper like the Telegraph. However, now, with these recent escalations, and we've had a lot of back and forth attacks from Hezbollah and Israel in recent days, there are talks in Israel, nothing official, that an all-out war with Lebanon is due to take place in the beginning of July. Again, nothing that's officially confirmed, but these rumors are circulating in Israel. And obviously one side that wants to prevent this, apart from the United States, is the UN, of course. The US, although gallant went to try and diffuse the tensions between Benjamin Netanyahu and the Biden administration, he still received a very similar response from the US government. They told him, we will still be sending weapons. However, there will still be a delay of the heavy bombs. The heavy bombs, the 1 ton and the 250 kg, quarter-ton bombs. Israel wanted 3,500 of these. US delayed. And President Joe Biden at the time, he said that Israel used these against civilian population, and we're not sending them to Israel. We will still send them everything they need to defend themselves, everything to do with the Iron Dome. However, there were other delays. Clearly, the US is using this as leverage against Israel. Again, nothing strategic. The strategy is still to support Israel, but it's a tactical move of leverage from the United States, because clearly the decision makers in Israel are not abiding by the demands or advice of the US not to go on a war with Lebanon, because that war, you cannot control it when it happens, and it could easily escalate to a regional war that many countries, apart from the countries who we saw participate so far, participating in such a war. So I wanted to share with you a couple of details from an article that was published in the Times of Israel, and then I'll obviously open up the space for all of the community to ask any questions, obviously, where we've heard these warnings from the UN. Now, for those of you who don't know, there are UNIFIL forces in Lebanon, supposedly to make sure that the resolution 1701 that came following the 2006 Israeli-Lebanese war, or what's commonly referred to as the Second Lebanese War, that everything is met. Usually, you will hear talks about the breaches from Hezbollah. So they will say, oh, Hezbollah launched a rocket here or what have, but they will ignore the fact that Israel breaches this resolution on a daily basis. Israel breaches this resolution on a daily basis, like it breaches every single UN resolution concerning the Palestinians and other countries as well, as if they are above the law. In this article, the Times of Israel titled it Herzog and Netanyahu tour north as UN warns of apocalyptic war with Hezbollah. Premier vows victory. President decries global apathy toward displaced Israelis. How ironic is that? President decries global apathy toward displaced Israelis. Iran said loath to send the Iraqi militias to Lebanon. Katz slams Erdogan's support for Hezbollah. Now the foreign minister as well. So it's not just about this warning, it's about a couple of other things. And now there are talks about Katz and obviously his criticism for Erdogan for supporting Hezbollah. And by the way, this shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone when it comes to Turkey, by the way. Turkey, when we had regional escalations, we saw Turkish participation. We saw Turkish participation in Iraq, not for American interests, but for their own interests. We saw Turkish participation in Syria, because Turkey obviously has a historical problem when it comes to Kurdish independence, and obviously with Lebanon, they also have a problem. They tried to have more influence in Lebanon recently. They are reestablishing their ties with Syria. We're hearing reports that the Turkish president and the Syrian president are scheduled to meet at some point in the near future. So obviously Turkey is very interested when it comes to Lebanon, and obviously when Israel starts attack in that area, it's coming closer to Turkey. They said Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and President Yitzhak Herzog toured northern Israel on Wednesday as months of skirmishes with Lebanon's Hezbollah were feared to be on the verge of escalating to an all-out war the United Nations said would be apocalyptic. Quote, apocalyptic. Netanyahu, touring the Lebanese border on Wednesday, observed a drill of the 55th Reserve Paratroopers Brigade, whose soldiers he hailed for their determination to defend the country, according to a statement from the Prime Minister's office. Flanked by his military secretary, Roman Goffman, the head of the IDF's Northern Command, Major General Ori Gordin, and other lower-ranking commanders, Netanyahu asserted that Israel would achieve victory in the north in case of a full-blown war with Hezbollah. The visits came as the IDF published footage of airstrikes it carried out on Hezbollah sites in southern Lebanon's Kafar Shuba, Ait al-Sha'b, and Khiyam. The army said it also shelled several more areas in South Lebanon with artillery. Earlier in the day, the army published footage of overnight airstrikes on Hezbollah targets in South Lebanon's Shib'a and Matmura. Meanwhile, Israeli local authorities said several anti-tank guided missiles fired by Hezbollah on Wednesday caused some damage. In the afternoon, at least 5 missiles struck Metullah, causing damage and sparking a fire. Later on the day, a missile was fired at Avivim, striking a home. The same home was hit by another missile several hours later. Let me note here one thing for you, is that the Israeli army uses many civilian homes in northern Israel as bases because most of these places are completely empty. You're talking about ghost towns. Over 90 towns are empty in the northern part of Israel, and many of them are not coming back, by the way. So the army uses civilian buildings, but Hezbollah always counter them with intel. For example, their attack in the Western Galilee about 2 months ago in a command base, that was done from a municipality building, and we're talking about towns here, they're small, within the civilian society, that was just recently established. How did they get the knowledge, Hezbollah? How did they strike them accurately? All of that. And they obviously published the image of their suicide drone landing there. They continued. Forces aligned with Hezbollah have carried out nearly daily attacks on northern communities and military posts since October the 8th, a day after thousands of Hamas-led fighters, this is what I'm going to call them because obviously they use different terminology, stormed southern Israel to kill nearly 1,200 people and take over 250 hostages, sparking the war in Gaza. Hezbollah says it is attacking Israel in support of the Palestinians. Early in the war, Israel evacuated communities along the border with Lebanon, fearing Hezbollah would carry out an onslaught similar to Hamas's. Over 8 months later, some 60,000 residents of northern Israel remain displaced. That number is not accurate. That number is now well over 100,000 because 2 months in, 1 month in, Israel declared that over 80,000 left. 85,000 was a standard number. 8 months in, you're talking about over 100,000 at least, if not hundreds of thousands across the north, fleeing the north, excluding obviously the Israelis who leave as a result of the escalation both from Gaza and from Lebanon. Fears of an all-out war have increased as displaced residents demand decisive action to remove Hezbollah from the border, as the Iran-backed group has escalated attacks and as Israel has carried out a series of high-profile assassinations against it. Now, before I continue with this article, there have been demands from Israel that Hezbollah withdraws to the Litani River, to the north of the Litani River. The Litani River is 40 miles up from the Israeli-Lebanese borders. There were reports about some of the negotiations going on the Lebanese front to try and solve it diplomatically, that Israel asked Hezbollah to go back 8 miles from the borders. And there was a response that Israel called unprecedented. What was that response? The response was Hezbollah told them, you want us to withdraw 8 miles? You withdraw 8 miles. So you withdraw 8 miles from the borders. Clearly, Israel is not used to being asked such things. Obviously, they're the arrogant, entitled genocide state. They're not used to someone like Hezbollah asking them, but they are asking them that, and rightfully so. So Israel reported it as if they were shocked. Now they continued with the warnings issued by the UN. UN humanitarian coordinator Martin Griffiths told reporters in Geneva on Wednesday that he saw Lebanon as, quote, the flashpoint beyond all flashpoints, pointing to southern Lebanon in particular. Griffiths, whose term ends this week, said he had been discussing with colleagues in Jerusalem the prospects of what might happen there. Quote, we are worried about the potential for further tragedy and deaths. He said, adding that a war with Lebanon could also draw Syria and would be, quote, potentially apocalyptic. Again, amid international concern, the foreign ministers of Germany and the Netherlands on Wednesday both called on their country's citizens to leave Lebanon, saying flights out of Beirut may soon no longer be available. The warnings, which came after German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock visited the region, followed a similar advisory issued by Canada's Foreign Ministry on Tuesday. Diplomatic efforts by the United States and, to a lesser extent, France have so far failed to make Hezbollah retreat beyond the Litani River, some 30 kilometers north of the border with Israel, in accord with UN Resolution 1701, which ended the 2006 Israel-Hezbollah conflict. Herzog, who on Wednesday concluded a 2-day stay in northern Israel with his wife, Michal, accused the world of not doing enough to de-escalate tensions there. The world is not doing enough to de-escalate, according to the Israeli president. Quote, the international community should not be surprised if the situation gets out of control, because the international community is barely lifting a finger, barely doing anything to contribute to the full security of Israeli residents. After repeated violations of international treaties and agreements from Lebanon and from Hezbollah, Herzog said, according to a statement from his office. So the Israeli president is concerned, he's upset from the international community because they're barely lifting a finger, barely doing anything to stop these violations of international treaties and agreements from Lebanon. I'm gonna cry. They continued. The statement said the president and his wife stayed in Safad and toured several communities and army bases in the region over the 2-day trip. Despite the bleak image conjured by the president, US officials reportedly assured their Israeli counterparts that Washington would give its full support to Israel in case of an all-out war. Are they? They're telling them their official statements are, we won't be able to defend you the way we defend you with Iran. So we're just talking about defense, not attack. Now, mind you, some analysts say that Israel would only attack Lebanon if they know they have full US backing. But again, to that I would say, and I'm not saying that I'm right, but to that I would say, Israel already went against US advice in Gaza. The US didn't want Israel to invade Gaza. The US didn't want Israel to invade Rafah. The US didn't want Israel to do many things that Israel did. And Israel did it without achieving anything militarily or politically. As a matter of fact, they put themselves in their worst state in history. You're talking about an existential threat. We haven't heard the term existential threat being used as commonly as it is and as conveniently, by the way, by many in Israel, as we have during the past 8 months, increasingly, it's always increasing, existential threat from ministers in the government, from heads, country, previous heads in the security establishment, politicians. But according to this, from behind curtains and in closed rooms, there full support. What does full support mean in accordance to the US? Lord knows. What do they mean? When you have the head, the most senior figure in the Joint Chiefs of Staff chairman is saying that we wouldn't be able to help you as we helped you with Iran, unless they obviously contradict themselves and have these statements as a show, the US. And we have seen contradictions, not that we haven't seen contradictions. On Tuesday, the White House is also said to have told Hezbollah that the group should not count on Washington to keep Israel from going to war. You see, this is the tone here. You just said that we're giving you full support. Now you're saying the White House also said to have told Hezbollah that the group should not count on Washington to keep Israel from going to war. Since when does Hezbollah count on the US anyway? When did Hezbollah count on the US? They consider Israel and the US as one. They know the score. And they know that Israel doesn't need excuses to go on an all-out war with Lebanon, but they've been very carefully calculating their attacks on Israel to not be seen as the side that instigates the full-blown war. That's why everything was limited to achieve the objectives of lifting the pressure of Gaza and exhausting the military army to levels of now probably it's going to tip over 50%. It was 30 to 40% in the first month in November. Now you're talking about at least 50%. If Israel indeed moves to stage 3 in the war in Gaza and the forces move to Lebanon, most of the forces, the remaining forces, you're talking about exhausting most of the Israeli army. And that's also something that the people who deny any effectiveness that's happening from Hezbollah, that's a point for them to observe, by the way, what's happening, alongside the very many facts that we're seeing from the northern part of Israel. Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, who has been in Washington since Sunday, that's a continuation of the article. And in the middle, by the way, I'm adding a bit of analysis and reading between the lines and some more information from my end as well, just to elaborate, because many of them, they don't have correct information, and things need to be put into perspective. They continue. Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, who has been in Washington since Sunday, conferred on Wednesday with U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, telling him that Israel is fighting only, quote, those who seek to harm us, both in Lebanon and in Gaza. Quote, let it be known that our war is not with the people of Gaza, our war is not with the people of Lebanon. That's a change of tone, Yoav Gallant. You used to call the Gazan population human animals. What happened? You warned the people of Beirut in November 2023. You sent a warning to the civilians. You said to the civilians of Beirut, we can do to the civilians of Beirut what we do to the civilians in Gaza. Why are you changing tone now? Who are you trying to appeal to? Or is it because the US is worried from your barbaric, abhorrent tone that you're trying to change it now? It's evident that you are against the people. As a matter of fact, Israel starts every war, every proper war, with the massive destruction to kill as many people as possible. This is what they do, without targeting anything to do with the resistance or the people who fight them or the people who want to harm us. So he said that to Sullivan. And he continued, our war is against Hamas, Hezbollah, and their backer, the Iranian regime, according to Yoav Gallant. They continued. Saudi-owned newspaper Sharq al-Awsat reported on Wednesday, citing 4 unnamed sources, that Iran has expressed reservations about plans by Iraqi militias backed by the Islamic Republic to fight alongside Hezbollah against Israel. Not sure how much I trust this newspaper, but they're reporting that based on this, because Iran supports the same groups. According to the sources, Iran was interested in proposals to supply Hezbollah, which included redeploying Iraqi militias in Syria and transferring weapons by a single truck instead of a convoy, so as to not attract Israeli strikes. However, it was reportedly less enthusiastic about the Iraqi militias' plan to travel to Lebanon, and Hezbollah was said to have rejected their offer of assistance. Again, many Saudi media outlets have the same toxicity as Zionist propaganda. Spin everything. Iran supports both of them. Plus, Hezbollah to Iran is the most important group in the region in terms of armed group. They are the crown for Iran. Obviously, the other movements are important, but Hezbollah has a special status. Meanwhile, Foreign Minister Israel Katz once again lashed out at Recep Tayyip Erdogan on Wednesday after the Turkish president accused Western powers of backing what he said were Israeli plans to attack Lebanon and spread war throughout the region. Quote, Israel is now setting its sights on Lebanon, and we see that Western powers behind the scenes are patting Israel on the back and even supporting them, end quote. He told lawmakers from his ruling AKP party, adding that, quote, Netanyahu's plans to spread war in the region will lead to a great disaster. Katz's response, the Israeli foreign minister, said, accused him of supporting Hezbollah. Obviously, Erdogan criticized Israel previously, and he showed support for the people. Quote, Erdogan is a war criminal who slaughters innocent Kurds across the Syrian border and tries to deny Israel its right to self-defense against a terror organization attacking from Lebanon under Iran's orders, wrote Katz. Be quiet and shame on you, he told. They obviously quoted a couple of other not very relevant details, but that was the main thing about them in terms of the warning. Now everyone's asking, how real is it going to happen? How realistic is it? Well, firstly, if you want to talk military sense, from a military sense, from a military perspective, it doesn't make 1 ounce of sense, because Israel, with all its army, failed in the weakest link amongst the resistance fronts, which is Gaza. There is apathy, lack of trust, refusal to serve. Tens of thousands of disabled, reports 70,000, they said, over hundreds of thousands of PTSD, tens of thousands killed. Obviously, they lied the numbers. They're struggling to make the numbers. Today, I published a video about them forcing Unit 8,200 personnel to go to the army because they're suffering so heavily. It doesn't make sense. They're incapable. But they have to show as if we are capable and spin it, the Israeli public. Obviously, many won't believe, but they would want to pass it to the public. It's not like they're going to go all out and admit that we have been defeated or we haven't achieved our objectives. Although there's been recent increase in clarity when it comes to the objectives of the war, especially by the IDF spokesperson Daniel Hagari, who said anyone who says we can eliminate Hamas, as if they're throwing sands in the eyes of people. So it doesn't make sense. And Israel really is not capable. What they're capable of is carrying out some strikes, causing some genocide. Obviously, if someone completely flips a switch, biological, chemical, nuclear, could be. But again, you're talking about massive escalation that the US doesn't want primarily. But they have a capacity to do that. My assumption was that they might do something bigger than what they're doing now. But not all out, to show the Israeli public that, look, we invaded Rafah finally after 5 months of threatening. Obviously, we didn't achieve anything, but we did. And now we moved to stage 3. And then with Lebanon, they'll tell the northern population, oh, look, we actually intensified the attacks with Hezbollah, and now we reached a deal. And only because we attacked them were we able to reach such a deal. Like what Benjamin Netanyahu is doing with Gaza. He always claims that it's the military pressure that we applied on Hamas that led to the temporary ceasefire. And it's only the military pressure on them that will give us a better deal in the future. Things that are completely unsubstantiated. But again, he sells it as such. And some people buy it. And this is what I wanted to share with you. Let me open up the space up for you to see if you have any questions or comments. Faraz, Mudassar, Mingla, and Faraz, again, thank you so much for your super thanks. I really appreciate your support. Faraz saying, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, peace be upon you and you, my friend, and all of you. And Mingla saying, Pakistan for Palestine. I'm 100% sure. Pakistani support for Palestine, the Pakistani people, almost unconditional. And I know that from many of my Pakistani friends. 100% sure. And again, thank you so much for your super thanks. Okay. Marcus Jackie, let's start with Marcus. What if Iran gives the green light to the Shia people to go to Lebanon? It's around 2 million ready to go, and already we see it happening in Iraq, Afghanistan, Iran, Pakistan, Syria. Well, there are a couple of things here. Obviously, these things are coordinated, absolutely. But I would say one thing that might sound or be unpopular to some is that this thing is Hezbollah, they have a level of independence. It's undeniable. You're not talking about Iran controlling them in remote control. Yeah, their supreme leader in terms of authority, religious authority, is in Iran. But don't other religious groups have religious authorities abroad? Catholics, religious authorities in the Vatican, right? Catholic people are spread out throughout the world. Likewise with other religious groups and other religions. And obviously they support them. But Hezbollah is a national Lebanese movement, and they have proven that time after time. They liberated Lebanese lands. They protected Lebanese people. They expelled occupiers from Lebanon. Hezbollah is a national resistance movement in Lebanon. And again, when you hear the term resistance, ask for what? Well, you can see their neighbor. Now, with regards to the other movements that Iran support, absolutely they're ready. Hezbollah, if they want, they would have over 1 million at their disposal. So where you have Gaza, and again, that's one of the things that are quite difficult to understand about Gaza. You're talking about a besieged place. How they survived this, how they went through, how they persevered, how they continued to fight. How are the people surviving? And the resistance, everything. And with all of that restriction and blockade, they managed to do what they're doing now and even introduce new weapons, new tactics to the field. What could Hezbollah do? Land routes open. And Israel can attack as many convoys as it wants, by the way. Land routes are open. Tunnels. The sea. Airplanes. So they have people at their disposal if they need them. It wouldn't necessarily be an Iranian order. It would be based on the need. It would be based on the need of the battle. Hezbollah already, they are very well equipped anyway. They have enough people. And look at their enemy. They're struggling with one army. And no one's willing to go and die for a genocidal state. Whereas the Lebanese resistance, they're fighting for a just cause. They're fighting against a genocidal, war criminal state. An apartheid state, an occupation. So you'd have many people who would be, but again, it doesn't have to be by Iranian order, but I would say it would be with in coordination, obviously, with Iran. Kate, who will pay attention to the UN when they fail to protect their own building, people, and staff? Hezbollah will face two fronts in this war. From Israel and from Cyprus, you're asking. Look, the UN, let's make it clear. The UN followed the League of Nations. This is a post-World War II formation that was supposed to be the soft power of the United States. That's the UN. And if you look at their history, what they've done and what they haven't done, you would realize that. How many resolutions are there for Palestine? Nothing, ink on paper. So I understand this notion. Hezbollah will face two fronts this war, Israel and Cyprus. Well, Cyprus are petrified now from Hezbollah. They're probably now asking all of the British forces, no, please don't do anything from our territory or what have you. They're denying, their leaders are denying that we have anything to do with it. And by the way, it's a clever move from Hezbollah saying that them starting it about Cyprus, so that Cyprus can be warned. Oh, hold on a second. No, I'm not going to do anything. And they understand there are repercussions. And by the way, don't underestimate the threats from Hezbollah. And now Turkey is showing solidarity. And Turkey has an interest because they have northern Cyprus too. They have an interest in Cyprus having trouble. It's a historical feud with Greece that they have. So this could potentially deter something happening from Cyprus. Maybe not surveillance, because the UK is helping Israel with surveillance on Lebanon. They've already gathered thousands of hours of intel from Lebanon, monitoring where Hezbollah go, where they move, and they obviously have thousands of more hours about the genocide in Gaza. 200 flights over Gaza reported by Declassified. And instead of them using this surveillance to document the genocide and the levels of destruction, they use it to support the genocidal state. That's the UK for you, the British government. But I think Cyprus is intimidated, and I think they will think twice before participating if something really escalates to a high level, especially with their tensions as well, the fact that they know how capable Hezbollah is, and with their tensions with Turkey too. And that was from Kate. Your long-lost pal, what is the level of involvement of socialism and socialists in the resistance movements in the region? Well, if you talk about the Palestinian case, they are there. They are there. They have always been there in the form of the PFLP and its offshoots. So the most blatantly socialist and Marxist Palestinian leftist movement is the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. Now, you've had offshoots. You have the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, the General Command. You also have other movements with socialist views, like some of the resistance committees movements. But in Gaza, they're really led by the PFLP. You also have the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, but they're there. Like in Gaza, you're talking about, and in the West Bank, you're talking about Abu Ali Mustafa brigades, a socialist movement. They're very socialist, and they believe in a one secular state, secular Palestinian states, and they obviously believe in socialism. And they've been always side to side with the Islamic movements, with the Islamic resistance movements. And Hamas supported them, and they gave them a very open environment. They supported them with like technology and production and what have you. But obviously, all of them operate. There are in Gaza, in particular, talking about 13, and that's in Gaza. By the other countries like Lebanon, there are, pan-Arabist movements, right? And that's in the main kind of fronts that we're talking about. Iraq probably less so, but we'll just spoke Palestine and Lebanon. If you talk about Gaza, which is the main hub, really, it's a formation of about 13 resistance movements who work in a joint manner. They have a joint room. That's why you will always see, and again, that's something that you maybe won't hear on mainstream media, that you have like other movements. It's not just Hamas versus Israel. It's the Palestinian people represented by so many parts of society, religious, secular, and leftist, and more traditional and conservative. That's why you will see in many cases joint operations between, for example, PFLP and Al-Qassam brigades, or PFLP and PIJ, or Fatah resistance movements in Gaza. So it's definitely there. It's definitely there. There is definitely a presence when it comes to socialist movements who believe in the revolution and believe in socialism, socialist values, and actually implement them. Because, when you talk about socialism, you've had so many interpretations now of socialism. But the main ones are more Islamic-led, if that makes sense. But the presence is definitely there. And your long-lost pal, thank you so much for your super. Okay. And Marcus saying, what if Iran gives very strategic weapons to Yemen and Iraq? I'm talking about hypersonic weapons. Well, Yemen today shot a hypersonic missile. They already declared in when they entered, I think, the third stage of escalation, they revealed hypersonic missiles. So they already have them. And the Iraqis have them too. So it's already there. Kate is saying, what does it mean even when Erdogan saying stand with Lebanon, provide military support, or just lip service? Look, obviously we know by now that Turkey, when it comes to stances, they're talking, right? They're talking. They haven't actively participated in anything militarily yet. But we have seen from past experience that if things get regional and bigger, Turkey has a role. For example, the Iraq war. The United States asked Turkey, and Erdogan was very new, it was just 1 year in. They asked Turkey to allow them to use its territories to conduct attacks in Iraq. They refused. Later, they started conducting actions in Iraq that suit them. When we talk about Lebanon after Hezbollah, it's not to say that they will intervene directly, but they have more reasons to. And from a geopolitical perspective, and that's what the US is worried about, by the way, you don't want to give other countries more reasons. So if you go on something very big in Lebanon, firstly, you're giving all of the resistance front, Gaza, Lebanon, Iraq, Yemen, Iran, you're giving them more reasons to escalate. So that's already a problem. Let alone other countries. And the US, they've been seeing, they judge the country or try and anticipate their reaction based on their record. And the record in Turkey's case, regional war, we intervened before. And although they're still a NATO member, they're not abiding by everything that the United States says. So there is a likelihood. Jacob's Mill, that's the last question that I have here. Unless any of you obviously have anything else. Jacob's saying, Salam, brother, do you think the USA Zionists will go for Yemen after Lebanon? Or they're already after Yemen? The genocide coalition led by the US and the UK. They're attacking Yemen. They're failing miserably. Eisenhower, the USS Eisenhower, now they're talking about the need to take it back for repairs. They're saying the staff are exhausted and it needs maintenance. Clearly, it's not working. And these people are not intimidated. Israel, at what capacity to go to Yemen? And obviously the intervention from the US and the UK, obviously in support of Israel, yeah, but there are also other interests to do with the trade. And Ansarullah proved that they can severely affect what's happening there, although they declared that it's targeting Israel. Iran plans is asking Hezbollah refused help from Iraq. That's not true. That's the report that you heard in the Saudi newspaper. What do we expect from them? They always spin things around. And don't forget, in Saudi Arabia, talking about the scholars, they call Hamas evil. Imagine the mainstream media. Marvin, India is in the US corner. Any chance India will flip on the US? Don't they have a large Muslim population and support for Palestine? Well, yeah, but obviously, you know, the part of the BRICS, they have their own interests too. The level of Muslim population wouldn't be very significant when it comes to their general decision making. You have a lot of bigotry and discrimination by the current Indian government against the Muslim population. End up supporting Palestine. Modi is very close to Netanyahu. I don't see his government supporting Palestine. You know, his political party people, you'll see them following him blindly, all of a sudden supporting Israel and not knowing why. But Modi and Netanyahu are very close. I don't see him flipping on Bibi, because apart from the fact that he has good relations with the US, he has very good relations with Netanyahu. Arcanarchus, do you think that there are more sea cables to be cut in the Red Sea still? And do you think it's US or Yemen is doing it because most of Asian European trade data goes via these cables? I'm sure there are. And, well, I'm not entirely sure. As in, I would assume there would be. I can't like completely, because I don't have enough knowledge to exactly how many and where they go from. I would assume they would have more. However, I don't think that specific targeting was very strategic, like a strategic way of attacking Europe in that sense. I think the Ansarullah want to send messages about what we're capable of. Their main thing is Israel, and that was proven. Then obviously you had some other companies acting like they're not dealing with Israel, going to different ports. Obviously they're monitoring everything, so they know what's happening. Let me see if we have anything else before we wrap up. Kate, where does Russia-China stand on this next war between madman lunatic Milikovsky and Hizb? Well, absolutely more inclined to support or show sympathy with Hezbollah than Israel. You see, if they took this position with Gaza, and really and truly, I'm not sure how much Hamas benefit them. I'm not sure how much Hamas benefit Russia and China, apart from the fact that they are bothering Israel, which they view as the US. And they like anything that bothers the US, because the US does worse things to them. When it comes to Hezbollah, you're talking about a much higher level of coordination between Hezbollah and Russia, primarily, before China. And by the way, people need to understand that this position and this partnership, it evolved. It's not something that was there all the time. But obviously Russia, they have many interests in Syria. They run the Tartus port in Syria. They have boots on ground in Syria. They have bases in Syria. They have air defenses in Syria. There are reports that they passed many weapons to Hezbollah already. Talking about next level stuff, more than obviously China, but not excluding China. China, you saw various types of weapons in Gaza, Chinese made. Very sophisticated snipers that the resistance, by the way, produced similar sniper, even supersedes them. But recently the red arrow that they use that I spoke about in another video, these are Chinese weapons. It's not like it's Chinese. And obviously with China, you know, even if they sold it to a country and then that country sold it to someone else who passed it to the Palestinians, they would have some knowledge. Because when it comes to agreements to do with arms, there is a lot of emphasis on the end user and who you can resell them to, right? So I would assume that China would also show more sympathy, but Russia definitely 100% show a lot of support to Hezbollah. Faraz is saying, why is Gallant still giving orders? Didn't he leave the war cabinet and betray Bibi or sympathy with? No, Gallant, it was Gantz who left. Gantz, who wasn't in Bibi's party. Gallant is the defense minister. He's still there. And he obviously makes decisions. He has problems. He has feuds with Netanyahu. In recent months, his tone is more and more aligned to Netanyahu. Their relationship is a little bit less hostile than before. But they still have tensions. So he's still there. It was Gantz who resigned. Ram plans, is it true that Saudi stopped all oil shipments to the US and put them sanctions? No, not at all. I haven't heard that anywhere. Kate Rocha said they would protect North Korea if West attack. Why don't they protect Iran, Syria? Well, they are in Syria. They saved Syria. If it wasn't for the Russian interference in Syria, the US would have collapsed the government. What do you think prevented the Obama administration when they started to send ships to the coasts of Syria? Up until Russia sent forces, so they saved Syria. And with Iran, we haven't tested that yet. No one attacked Iran on a mass scale to see if Russia would intervene or not. And in my opinion, they will absolutely intervene, including China, because to them, that's crossing the line. Ram plans, so why doesn't Russia completely liberate Syria from the US Army, 900 soldiers at the US base? Well, because the Syrian question is a very complicated and a multifaceted one. You're talking about a country that is definitely not democratic, but that had support and still has support for the resistance, or at least part of the resistance movements. They obviously had tensions with Hamas after the revolution began. People, ever since the establishment, ever since the revolution began, that was established based on a genuine need for reform. You immediately had intervention because the West viewed the Arab Spring as something that they wanted to twist to their favor. They didn't anticipate everything. They didn't plan everything. You know, many people tell you, no, all of it is in American. This is not as simple as that. but they obviously operate on a large scale to shift things towards their direction, like they try to do in Libya, how they successfully did it in Egypt. And in Syria, you obviously have the people with, the people against, the people with and against the government. They had many divisions between them, and you had many interests in Syria already. Israeli interests, American interests, Russian interests, Iranian interests, Turkish interests. So there are underlying understandings there. If you even Google like Russian and US forces in Syria, you'll see some of them talking to each other sometimes. So if they understand, I have a base here to protect that, you have a base there to protect this. And obviously I have the Kurds. So it's a very complicated thing here. It's not just a matter of pro-government and against government, by the way. Some people even doubt that the government has any power in Syria. It's not like they have a lot of power. You know, when Russia stepped in, they started having a big say in what happens. And still, you have other interests. Listen, Israel was back and forth with Russia and Syria. Netanyahu used to go to Moscow regularly and send his foreign minister to coordinate the situation in Syria. People need to understand that. It's not just all black and white. Marvin Vergas, question, how many power do Christian militias have in Lebanon? Will they work with Hezbollah? How many Christian militias are in Lebanon? Well, Lebanon, for those of you who are unaware, it had a bloody and a very ugly, hideous civil war. In the civil war, many people like to portray it, and many people like to simplify things, by the way. And they don't know that they are not doing the people a favor, as if it was the Christians versus... In Lebanon, you had Christians against Christians, from different denominations, like some Catholics, some Maronites on different sides. You had Shia on different sides, Sunnis on different sides. It's mixed. There are some Christian militias who are pro-Hezbollah or aligned with them. There are Christian militias who are against them. Predominantly the Lebanese forces, led by Samir Jaj. So it's quite a complicated thing, but they do have some power, some of them, but nothing in comparison to Hezbollah. People need to understand that. Lebanon, in terms of power, is Hezbollah. Hezbollah has more power than most countries, many countries in the world, in terms of firepower. An arsenal of missiles, for example, and drones, more than most European countries, if not all of them. Yeah, you'll have obviously European countries with fighter jets and submarines and nuclear, but firepower, Hezbollah are very, very capable. The Incognegro, thank you so much for your super thanks. I really appreciate it. Marvin, what will happen to Kurds in regional conflict with Russia and Syria? Try and push Kurds out of Syria. You think Kurd will get a nation? Good for you as well. Well, listen, the Kurdish question is a very big one. I think these people, after the this map drawing, after the Sykes-Picot agreement of the whole region, it totally It was deliberately done in that manner to keep the conflict going. So you'll have the Kurds scattered across Iran, Turkey, Syria, and Iraq. Now, foreign forces use it to this day. Why? For the same reasons that they divided the region before. Divide and rule. So you will see Israel trying to support some of the Kurdish movements here and there, other for everyone for their own reasons. So I don't think there will be a push for people out of Syria. It doesn't look like it's going to happen. In terms of a state, potentially in the future. I mean, in Iraq, they have a high level of independence, but they're still under the Iraqi government. But that could be the case in the future. Marcus Jackie, what do you think about a direct war between Iran and Israel? Because USA will never give up on Israel, but Iran will never show up their capability in real big war. Full-blown, full-scale war, I think it would undeniably attract other countries. It wouldn't just be both these countries. And I think Iran would eventually prevail in such a war. I think Iran would prevail. Because Israel, look, if the US are telling them we're not going to support. If they didn't support them in a limited attack on Iran, why would they go and support them in all that war? And that was the final one from Marcus. We'll finish it there, guys. Thank you so much for joining me. Again, apologies for the late live stream, but I appreciate so many of you came, although it was late. Faraz, Mudassar, Mingla, Faraz, Yor and the Incog, thank you so much for your super thanks. Thank you to all of our obviously regular members and live streamers, all of the new subscribers as well. Everyone, I see new faces. Thank you so much for participating. I will hopefully be with you tomorrow. Apart from that, enjoy the rest of your week. Take care, and I'll see you soon in the next video. Peace, everyone. Salam.